The control boat waits to come alongside the pontoon and put the scientific officer and met officer on board to help in boxing the animal units. On return to the ship, the boxes are stacked in the lobby and then passed into the dirty hold. They're slid down a chute and then carried to a convenient place for the next stage. Lids are taken off as soon as possible to give the animals air. The ship's side door, closed, can be seen on the other side of the lobby. Fore and aft doors shut off the lobby from the main port passageway of the ship. It was a bad arrangement crossing this passage, which has been altered. The animals are unboxed here and put into cages that have been made ready by the ship's veterinary staff during the trials. It's a two-man job dealing with the monkeys. This shows rather nicely the best grip, with the monkey's arms behind his back. They're full of fight and sometimes give a bit of trouble. The job's not at all easy in full protective clothing and wearing a respirator. They have to be handled with care. They may be infected, and anyway, it's important not to let them get away, as they're a nuisance to catch. The safety officer took a large number of swabs and air samples both here and on the pontoon. The laboratory, meanwhile, begins assessment. Plates have been poured a day or two before in the small plate pour room, the door of which wasn't usually wide open like this. We usually used about 400 to 700 plates for a day's work. Two problems were met here: rolling, which made pouring impossible but could be stopped by suitable anchoring, and the ever-changing trim of the ship, for which these benches were fitted with levelling screws. Assessment was done by a team of 4 or 5 using the conventional drop plate method. Dilutions were made by mouth-operated pipette. There was no trouble despite the absence of special safety devices, or perhaps because of it. The plates are being packed into tins for incubation. Here the tins are going into one of the hot rooms to be incubated. Counting after incubation was done in the simplest possible way, which everyone seemed to prefer. After autoclaving, the usual chore of washing up, maybe 1,000 or more bits of glassware at a session. We washed in soap flakes, rinsed in tap water, which was ship's distilled seawater, of course, and finally double rinsed in lab distilled water. When there were several hundred animals to be autopsied, a mass production system was used. preparations going on here. The animals have been killed just beforehand, labelled, and passed from the dirty hold into the post-mortem room. The principle is that each man has one job, and the bodies pass from one man to the next round a rotating table, an idea developed at Suffield in 1945. The body first clipped onto the table with its identifying number on the paper underneath it. Passes to the first man, who lays back the skin. The second man exposes the organs. Third man takes a snip of spleen. The procedure, of course, depends on the disease you're looking for. The plates are handed by a man working from a side bench. Instruments are sterilized by a rinse in Lysol to remove tissue and blood, and then standing in acetone. Each man has a dozen sets and uses them in rotation. The pathologist taking a lymph node and reporting the gross pathology to the recorder, who sits at a side table. Bodies finally removed from the table. The recorder noting the pathologist's findings. It's possible with this technique to deal satisfactorily with 100 or more pigs an hour. This system was of course only used for large numbers. Casual PMs were dealt with by 1 or 2 men. The bodies are destroyed in an incinerator in the dirty hold. The incinerator is a standard coal-fired one. This organization was, as I said, closely linked with MRD by air. A large quantity of stores was handled both ways by the Valletta aircraft. The main need was for the swift and safe transport of animals. The Valletta also acted as passenger aircraft for important visitors and staff. All the thousands of guinea pigs, as well as the monkeys, arrived in excellent trim. The aircraft had ample room for stores and was comfortable for passengers. We could scarcely dispense with this important part of the organization. Our 2 MFVs were the usual link with Stornoway, one of them here, taking off local dignitaries after the sole occasion on which we were able to entertain on board. It was ironical but inevitable that the MFV trip from Stornoway to the site took as long as the air trip from Pontoon to Stornoway. The MFVs did good service, often making the 20-mile run 4 times a day in rough weather, though sometimes a night run when we were lying off Stornoway was calm enough. The final but not unimportant member of the team was the tug, our clear-range vessel. Hengist, there for most of the season, was also an invaluable link with Stornoway. The meteorological side was interested not only in the trials proper, but in using the opportunity for Met research. This large buoy, being hoisted out under the Met officer's eye, was designed to hold a mast steady in all reasonable sea conditions. The captain watching reflectively. Although the weather was frequently unkind to us, we were able to get off 57 trials, of which 32 were with animals and 12 were concerned with long-range travel. The captain had to watch the general weather for another reason. The trials compelled us to anchor in an otherwise ridiculous position, and strong onshore winds rose quickly and sometimes with little warning. We had then to move for the safety of the ship. We had experience of the anchor dragging on a few occasions, fortunately without any harm done. We had rain too, as might be expected. The upper deck was known familiarly as Loch Lomond. The ship was normally anchored with the bows to the swell to reduce rolling, using the stern anchor to maintain this position against wind and tide. However, when things got too uncomfortable, we had no choice but to move. The engine room department was frequently at short notice, and altogether we did about 700 miles steaming at the site, just to avoid unacceptable risk to the ship. You can just see the pontoon there, wallowing in the distance as we pass it on one of our retreats. We were at no time anxious about the safety of the pontoon, which could ride out any likely storm. There was no doubt about the strength of the wind. Because of this trouble with the weather, such an operation, although at a fixed site, must be regarded as very nearly a fully sea-going one. On one occasion, a motorboat, which could not be hoisted before the sea was too rough, had to make an uncomfortable trip alongside us to the shelter of Stornoway. We packed up in September '52, with trials completed and waiting only for the final holding period for animals. It was a calm day when the bow vessel unmoored the pontoon and handed it over to the tug. A couple of days later, we were accompanied by a gale over to the mainland, where we'd intended to inspect Grenard Island. But weather drove us from there also, and we left Loch Hugh the following morning after a very anxious night. It was quieter as we passed Cape Wrath, but the pontoon, 3 days ahead of us, had had a rough time and did not arrive until a week after Ben Lomond. We got into Sheerness on the 28th of September, and we were glad to look round at what seemed at first like the height of civilization. There were some final post-mortems to do. The dirty hold had to be thoroughly decontaminated, and there were stores to be packed for return to Porton. While we waited for a berth at Chatham, final records were written up and packing went on. We got alongside on the 1st of October, and so we found our way back to the department. All that remained to be done was to write a report and make this film, and of course to prepare for Operation Hesperus 1953.